Welcome. I'm Dr. Akshay Jain, endocrinologist in Vancouver, Canada. And with me is a very special guest today. We have Dr. James Kim, primary care physician working in Calgary in Canada as well. And both Dr. Kim and I were fortunate to attend the recently concluded American Diabetes Association annual conference in Orlando in June. And what we thought we could share with you are some of the key learnings that we found very insightful, clinically quite relevant. And we were hoping to bring our own conclusion regarding what these findings were, both from a primary care perspective as well as from an endocrinology perspective. So we handpicked a few studies. I mean, there were so many different studies. Frankly, it was so difficult to pick them. But we handpicked a few studies which we felt we could do a bit of a deeper dive on, and we'll talk about each of these studies. So welcome, Dr. Kim, and thanks for joining us on Medscape.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jain. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So I think we would be probably the best place to start would be with the SURMOUNT-OSA study. This was highlighted at the American Diabetes Association conference. Essentially, it looked at people that are living with obesity who also had obstructive sleep apnea. And this was a randomized controlled trial where individuals either got tirzepatide, trade name Mounjaro, or they were receiving placebo treatment. And we looked at the change in their apnea-hypopnea index at the end of the study. Now, this included both people who are using CPAP machines as well as those who are not using CPAP machines at baseline. We do know that a lot of individuals with sleep apnea may not be using these machines. And at a baseline, their apnea-hypopnea index, or AHI, was greater than 50. And at the end of the study, we saw that there was a mean reduction in the AHI by over 60%. That was a big reduction. Dr. Kim, according to you, what are the what's the relevance of this study in primary care?
Oh, massive. I mean, obstructive sleep apnea is probably one of the most underdiagnosed yet huge cardiac risk factor that we tend to overlook in primary care. We sometimes say that, oh, it's just a sleep apnea, so what's the big deal? But we do know that it's a big problem. And we know that more than 50% of the people with type 2 diabetes actually have obstructive sleep apnea, and in some studies actually even quoted that even 90% of their population cohorts actually had sleep apnea. So this is a big deal. What we know so far, we know that the obstructive sleep apnea, which I'm just going to call it as OSA, it increases the risk of hypertension, cholesterol, and worsening blood glucose in terms of A1C and fasting glucose, which eventually leads to MI, arrhythmia, stroke, and eventually cardiovascular death. But we also know that the people with type 2 diabetes have increased risk of OSA. So seems to be like a bidirectional relationship between diabetes and OSA. It seems like the weight plays the biggest role in terms of developing OSA, and a number of studies actually have shown this. And also, thankfully, some of the studies actually show that with the weight loss, it improves not just an OSA, but improves the blood pressure, the cholesterol, the blood glucose, and improves the insulin sensitivities. And these have been fascinating. And we see these patients every single day. I mean, if you think about it, in your population, about like 50 to 90% of the patients having OSA, I mean, that's a lot. And if you haven't seen any person with OSA this week, you probably missed them, very likely. Therefore, this SURMOUNT-OSA trial was quite fascinating with, as you mentioned, 50 to 60% reduction in the severity of OSA is very impressive. And even more impressive, I think, is that about 50% of the patients who are on tirzepatide, the OSA improved so much that they may not even need to be on CPAP machines. So those who were on CPAP may not need to be on CPAP any longer. I mean, these is a huge, huge data, especially for primary care, because as you mentioned, we see these people every single day.
Yeah, and thanks for pointing that out. I mean, clearly it's very clinically relevant. I think the most important takeaway for me from this study was the correlation between the weight loss and the improvement in the AHI. So clearly it showed that compared to placebo, so placebo had about a 6% drop in AHI, whereas 60% drop in the tirzepatide group. So you can see it's clearly significantly different. And the placebo group did not have any significant degree of weight loss, whereas the tirzepatide group had nearly a 20% weight loss. So this again goes to show that there is a very close correlation between weight loss and improvement in OSA. What's very important to note is that we've seen this in the past as well. So we had seen some of this data with other GLP-1 agents, but the extent of improvement that we have seen in the SURMOUNT-OSA is significantly more than what we've seen in previous studies. So there is a ray of hope now where we have medical management to offer as well for people who are living with obesity and obstructive sleep apnea.
I also just want to add that from a primary care perspective, this study also showed the improvement of the sleep apnea related symptoms as well. So the biggest problem with the sleep apnea, or at least what patients complain of, well, if your spouse, they complain of the person snoring too much, but it's a symptom. It's the next day symptoms that really does disturb people. So chronic fatigue. I have numerous patients who say that once they've been treated with sleep apnea, they feel like a brand new person. They have sudden bursts of energies that they never felt before. And just by 50% of these people actually having huge improvement of the symptoms as well. This is a huge, huge trial. The only thing that I wish this study included were the people with a mild obstructive sleep apnea who were symptomatic. Now, I do understand that with the other studies, this population, the data have been a bit conflicting, but it would have been really awesome if they had those patients included. However, it is still a significant study for primary care.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So fatigue improves, overall quality of life improves. So that's very important from primary care perspective. From an endocrinology perspective as well, we know that management of sleep apnea can often lead to improvement in male hypogonadism, in PCOS, as well as insulin resistance. So the amount of insulin required or the number of medications needed for managing diabetes can improve. Hypertension can improve as well. So multiple benefits that you can get from appropriate management of sleep apnea. Thanks, Dr. Kim. Really appreciated your insights about SURMOUNT-OSA.